The wind carried death in its teeth that November afternoon in 1885, and Oliver Armstrong knew it the moment he stepped out of the general store in Lincoln, Nebraska, with his supplies bundled under his arm. The sky had transformed from pale gray to an ominous charcoal in the span of 20 minutes, and the temperature had plummeted so fast he could see his breath crystallizing in the air before his face. Oliver had lived through enough Nebraska winters to recognize the warning signs of a blizzard that would kill anyone caught unprepared in its path. He hurried toward his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, tying down his supplies with practiced efficiency. The streets of Lincoln were already emptying as shopkeepers shuttered their windows and townsfolk rushed home to their families. Oliver planned to do the same, heading back to his small ranch 15 miles outside of town. He had been working that land for 3 years now, ever since mustering out of the cavalry at 23. Now, at 26, he had built a decent life for himself with a modest herd of cattle and a cabin that kept the wind out on most days. It was not much, but it was his, and he had earned every plank of wood and every head of livestock through honest labor. He was just about to mount Copper when he heard the sound that changed everything. A sharp crack echoed down Main Street, followed by a woman's cry of alarm. Oliver turned to see a small wagon careening wildly as one of its wheels splintered apart completely. The vehicle lurched sideways, and the horse hitched to it reared in panic. A young woman in a dark traveling dress clutched at the reins, trying desperately to control the frightened animal. Without thinking, Oliver ran toward the chaos. He grabbed the horse's bridle, speaking in low, firm tones that cut through the animal's panic. The horse fought him for a moment, eyes rolling white with fear, but Oliver held steady. Years of working with livestock had taught him patience and confidence, and gradually the horse calmed enough that it stopped trying to bolt. The woman climbed down from the wagon seat, her face pale beneath a bonnet that had come partially undone in the commotion. Oliver could see she was young, probably around his own age, with dark hair escaping in wind-blown strands around her face. Her eyes were wide with a combination of fear and relief. "Thank you," she said, her voice breathless. "I thought the horse was going to run away with the whole wagon." "Wagon's not going anywhere now, miss," Oliver said, gesturing to the destroyed wheel. "That wheel is beyond fixing out here." The woman looked at the broken wheel and then up at the darkening sky. Oliver saw the exact moment when true fear entered her expression. She understood what that sky meant, what it promised for anyone caught outside when the storm hit. "I was trying to reach my cousin's farm," she said. "She lives about 10 miles west of town. I am supposed to be staying with her for the winter while I work as a school teacher. The school term starts next week." Oliver glanced at the sky again. 10 miles west would take her right through open prairie, with nothing but grassland between here and there. Even if her wagon had been intact, she would never make it before the blizzard struck. The wind was already picking up, cutting through his coat like knives. "Madam, I do not mean to alarm you, but that storm is going to hit within the hour," Oliver said. "Maybe less. You will not make it to your cousin's place. Nobody can help you get this wagon fixed in time either. The blacksmith has probably already closed up shop and gone home." The woman's face went even paler. "What should I do?" Oliver made a decision that his practical mind warned him against, but his conscience would not let him ignore. "My ranch is about 15 miles southeast of here. It is going to be a hard ride, but if we leave right now and push the horses, we can make it before the worst of the storm hits. You can shelter there until the blizzard passes." "I cannot impose on you like that," the woman protested, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Miss, you are going to die if you stay out here," Oliver said bluntly. I have seen what these prairie blizzards do to people. You will not survive a night in this cold, not without proper shelter. My cabin is not fancy, but it has a stove and 4 walls and a roof that does not leak. That is more than you will have out here." The woman looked around at the nearly deserted street, at her broken wagon, at the threatening sky. Oliver could see her weighing her options and coming to the same conclusion he already had. There were no good choices left, only the least dangerous one. "I do not even know your name," she said. "Oliver Armstrong. I run a cattle ranch outside of town." "Josephine Harper," she said. "From Ohio originally, but I have been teaching in smaller schools for the past 2 years." "Miss Harper, I promise you I am a gentleman and I mean you no harm," Oliver said. "But we need to leave right now if we are going to outrun this storm." Josephine nodded, and Oliver could see the trust she was placing in him, a complete stranger. It was not lost on him what a leap of faith this represented. A young woman alone, accepting help from a man she had never met, riding off into the wilderness with him. In normal circumstances, it would be scandalous. But these were not normal circumstances. These were life and death circumstances. Oliver quickly unhitched her horse from the broken wagon. The mare was a decent animal, sturdy enough for the ride ahead. He helped Josephine retrieve a small traveling bag from the wagon bed, the only possession she could reasonably carry. Everything else would have to stay behind. "Can you ride?" Oliver asked. "Well enough," Josephine said. "I am not an expert horsewoman, but I can stay in a saddle." Oliver helped her mount the mare, then swung up onto Copper. The first snowflakes were already beginning to fall, fat and heavy, the kind that promised feet of accumulation before morning. The wind had picked up even more, and Oliver could feel the temperature continuing to drop. "Stay close to me," Oliver said. "Do not fall behind. If the snow gets too heavy to see, I will tie a rope between our horses so we do not get separated." Josephine nodded, her jaw set with determination. Oliver could see she was frightened, but she was not falling apart. There was steel in her spine, and he respected that. They would need that strength in the hours ahead. They rode out of Lincoln at a fast trot, pushing the horses as much as Oliver dared. The town disappeared behind them quickly, swallowed by the gathering storm. The prairie stretched out in all directions, an ocean of grass now being buried under an increasingly thick blanket of white. The first hour was manageable. The snow fell steadily but not yet heavily enough to obscure visibility completely. Oliver kept them on a steady southeastern course, using landmarks he knew well to guide their path. A distinctive rock formation here, a lone cottonwood tree there, a dry creek bed that ran in the right direction. He had ridden this route hundreds of times and knew it like the lines on his own palm. But by the second hour, conditions had deteriorated dramatically. The wind howled across the prairie like a living thing, driving the snow horizontally into their faces. Oliver could barely see 20 feet ahead. The cold was brutal, cutting through layers of clothing and numbing exposed skin. He glanced back at Josephine and saw her hunched over her horse's neck, trying to present less surface area to the punishing wind. Oliver pulled up his horse and waited for Josephine to come alongside him. He had to shout to be heard over the wind. "We need to rope the horses together," he yelled. "The visibility is too poor. Stay right behind me." Josephine nodded, her face red from the cold, her lips nearly blue. Oliver pulled a length of rope from his saddlebag and tied one end to his saddle horn and the other to Josephine's. The rope stretched about 8 feet between them, close enough to keep them together but far enough to give the horses room to move. They continued on, but progress became increasingly difficult. The snow was accumulating fast, making the horses work harder with every step. Oliver could feel Copper beginning to labor beneath him, and he knew they could not maintain this pace much longer. His ranch had to be close now. It had to be. The world had become a whiteout nightmare. Oliver could no longer see any landmarks. He was navigating by instinct now, by the feeling of the land beneath the snow, by the direction of the wind, by pure hope. If he had misjudged the distance or veered off course, they could ride right past his cabin and never know it until it was too late. Just when Oliver was beginning to truly worry that they were lost, that they would die out here in the white void, he saw a dark shape looming through the snow ahead. His heart leapt with relief. The cabin. They had made it. He urged Copper forward, Josephine's mare following on the rope. As they drew closer, the cabin solidified from the storm's obscurity. It was a simple structure, built from rough-hewn logs with a single door and 2 small windows. Next to it stood a small barn where Oliver kept Copper and stored hay and equipment. It had never looked more welcoming. Oliver dismounted and helped Josephine down from her horse. She was shaking violently from the cold, and he could see she was near the end of her strength. They needed to get the horses sheltered and get inside immediately. "Can you make it to the door?" Oliver shouted over the wind. Josephine nodded, though Oliver was not entirely convinced. He pointed to the cabin. "Go inside. The door is not locked. Get the fire started if you can. I need to get the horses into the barn." Josephine stumbled toward the cabin, clutching her small bag, while Oliver led both horses to the barn. The structure provided immediate relief from the wind, though it was almost as cold inside as out. Oliver worked quickly, removing the saddles and tack, rubbing down both horses with handfuls of straw to dry their coats, making sure they had hay and water. Copper and the mare would be fine here. The barn was solid and the horses had thick winter coats. They would generate enough body heat to stay warm. Oliver grabbed his saddlebags and supplies from the store and fought his way through the snow to the cabin. The distance was only about 30 feet, but the storm made it feel like a mile. When he finally pushed through the cabin door, he found Josephine kneeling in front of the cold stove, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the matches she was trying to light. "Here, let me," Oliver said, taking the matches from her. His own hands were not much steadier, but he managed to get a match lit and held it to the kindling he always kept prepared in the stove. The dry wood caught quickly, and within minutes a fire was crackling to life. Oliver added larger pieces of wood to the growing flames, then turned his attention to Josephine. She was still shaking uncontrollably, her lips blue, her face dangerously pale. He had seen exposure before, and he knew she needed to warm up gradually and get into dry clothes. "Miss Harper, you need to get out of those wet things," Oliver said. "You are going to catch your death staying in those damp clothes." Josephine nodded but seemed unable to move, still crouched by the stove. Oliver realized she was probably too cold to think clearly. He went to the chest at the foot of his bed and pulled out a spare set of long underwear, thick wool socks, and a heavy flannel shirt. They would be far too large for her, but they were dry and warm. "Here," he said, handing her the clothes. "I will turn my back and tend to the fire. You get changed." Oliver busied himself with stoking the fire and lighting the oil lamps that hung from the walls. The cabin was simple but well built. It consisted of a single large room with his bed in one corner, a small kitchen area with a table and 2 chairs, the stove that served for both heating and cooking, and some shelves and storage. It was a bachelor's dwelling, sparse and utilitarian, but clean and orderly. "You can turn around," Josephine's voice said after a few minutes. Oliver turned to see her standing by the stove, swimming in his oversized clothes. The long underwear bagged around her ankles. The shirt hung almost to her knees, and she had rolled the sleeves up several times just to free her hands. Despite the absurdity of the outfit, Oliver was relieved to see that her shaking had subsided somewhat and a bit of color was returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," Josephine said. "I was so cold I could not think straight." "You are welcome to stand as close to that stove as you need," Oliver said. "I am going to make us something hot to drink. Coffee or tea?" "Coffee would be wonderful," Josephine said. Oliver set about making coffee, using the supplies he had just purchased in town. While the water heated, he hung Josephine's wet clothes on a line he strung near the stove. His own clothes were damp as well, so he changed into dry things, politely asking Josephine to face the wall while he did so. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. The wind screamed around the cabin's corners, and snow piled up against the walls. The windows were completely obscured by white. Inside, the stove's heat gradually filled the small space, creating an island of warmth and safety in the midst of the blizzard's violence. Oliver poured 2 cups of strong coffee and handed one to Josephine. She wrapped both hands around the tin cup, savoring its warmth. "I cannot thank you enough for what you did," Josephine said. "If you had not stopped to help me, I would be dead right now." "Anyone would have done the same," Oliver said, though they both knew that was not necessarily true. Plenty of people would have been too focused on their own survival to stop for a stranger. "No," Josephine said firmly. "Not everyone would have risked their own life to save someone they did not know. You could have made it back here much faster without me slowing you down. You might not have made it at all because you stopped to help me." Oliver felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, not because it was unwelcome, but because he had simply done what seemed necessary. "I could not leave you there to die," he said simply. They drank their coffee in silence for a moment, both warming from the inside out. The cabin creaked and groaned under the wind's assault, but the walls held firm. Oliver had built this place himself, and he had built it to last. "How long do you think the storm will last?" Josephine asked. "Hard to say," Oliver replied. "These prairie blizzards can blow for days sometimes. We should be prepared to be stuck here for at least 2 or 3 days, maybe longer." Oliver saw a flicker of concern cross Josephine's face, and he understood her worry. She was alone in a cabin with a man she had met only hours ago. The situation was compromising at best, potentially dangerous at worst. He needed to put her at ease. "Miss Harper, I want you to know that you are completely safe here," Oliver said. "I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not take advantage of this situation in any way. You will have the bed, and I will sleep on the floor by the stove. We are simply 2 people taking shelter from a storm, nothing more." Josephine met his eyes, and Oliver saw her evaluating him, trying to determine if his words were sincere. Whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her, because she relaxed slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. I appreciate your reassurance. This is not exactly a situation I ever imagined myself in. Call me Oliver, please. And I imagine not. How did you end up in Lincoln?" Josephine wrapped her hands more tightly around her coffee cup. "I answered an advertisement for a teaching position at the new school. The town is growing and needed someone to teach the children. My cousin married a farmer outside of Lincoln a few years ago, and she wrote to me about the position. It seemed like a good opportunity." "You came all the way from Ohio by yourself?" "I did. I took the train as far as I could, then a stage coach the rest of the way. I only arrived in Lincoln this morning, which is why I was still trying to reach my cousin's farm when the storm hit. I was supposed to meet her in town, but there was some confusion about the timing." "That was quite a journey," Oliver said. "I have been teaching in small towns for the past 2 years, Josephine explained. "After my parents died, I needed to support myself. Teaching was one of the few respectable professions available to me. I have taught in schools in Pennsylvania and Illinois. This is my first position out west. I am sorry about your parents, Oliver said. Thank you. It was a fever that took them both within days of each other. My older brother inherited the family farm, and while he offered me a place in his home, I did not want to be a burden. I wanted to make my own way. Oliver respected that. He understood the drive for independence, the need to prove oneself. It was part of what had brought him out west as well. What about you? Josephine asked. How did you end up ranching in Nebraska? I was in the cavalry for 3 years after the war, Oliver said, referring to the various conflicts with native tribes that had marked the late 1870s and early 1880s. When I mustered out, I decided I had had enough of taking orders and following other people's plans. I wanted land of my own, a life I could control. I had saved most of my pay, so I bought this section of land and started building. That was 3 years ago. You run the ranch by yourself, mostly. I hire help during roundup and when I need to move cattle to market, but day to day it is just me. I have about 200 head of cattle now. It is not a big operation, but it is growing steadily. That sounds lonely, Josephine said. Oliver shrugged. I suppose it can be. But I like the independence, and I have neighbors within riding distance if I need help or company. There is a sense of community out here, even though we are spread out. Folks look after each other. As if to emphasize his point about the harshness that made such cooperation necessary, a particularly strong gust of wind slammed into the cabin, rattling the door in its frame. Both Oliver and Josephine looked toward the sound, reminded of the storm's fury outside their small sanctuary. We should eat something, Oliver said. I have supplies and I can make a decent stew if you are hungry. I am starving, actually, Josephine admitted. I did not eat lunch because I was trying to reach my cousin's farm. Oliver set about preparing a meal. He had fresh vegetables from his garden that he had stored in the root cellar beneath the cabin, along with salt pork and dried beans. It was simple fare, but hearty and nourishing. While the stew simmered on the stove, filling the cabin with savory smells, Oliver and Josephine continued to talk. They spoke of their childhoods, their families, their dreams and disappointments. Oliver found himself opening up to this stranger in ways he rarely did with anyone. There was something about the isolation of the storm, the enforced intimacy of sharing the small cabin, that broke down the usual barriers between people. Josephine told him about growing up in a small Ohio town, about her love of books and learning, about the challenges of teaching children whose parents sometimes did not value education. Oliver told her about his years in the cavalry, about the difficult things he had seen and done, about his dream of building something lasting and good on this land. As they talked, Oliver found himself increasingly drawn to Josephine. She was intelligent and articulate, with a quick wit and a warm laugh. She had spirit and courage, qualities he admired. The way she had held herself together during the harrowing ride through the storm, the way she was adapting to this strange and compromising situation, showed strength of character. When the stew was ready, they sat at the small table and ate. The meal was delicious, made more so by their hunger and the warmth of the cabin after the brutal cold outside. They ate seconds, then thirds, until the pot was nearly empty. After dinner, Oliver washed the dishes while Josephine checked her clothes drying by the stove. The storm continued unabated outside and darkness had fallen, making the world beyond the cabin's walls a black void punctuated only by the white swirl of snow. Your clothes are still pretty damp, Oliver observed. They will not be fully dry until tomorrow. That is fine, Josephine said. What you lent me is perfectly adequate for now. An awkward silence fell between them. It was full dark now, and they were both tired from the ordeal of the day, but neither seemed quite ready to address the sleeping arrangements. Finally, Oliver spoke up. "I meant what I said earlier. You take the bed, and I will make a bedroll on the floor by the stove." "That does not seem fair," Josephine protested. "It is your home, your bed. I can sleep on the floor." "Absolutely not," Oliver said firmly. "I will not have a guest, especially a lady, sleeping on the floor when there is a perfectly good bed available. Besides, I have slept on the ground more times than I can count during my cavalry days. A floor with a blanket is luxury compared to some of the places I have bedded down." Josephine looked like she wanted to argue further, but something in Oliver's expression must have told her it would be useless. "Very well," she said, "but I feel guilty about it." "Do not," Oliver said. "I will sleep just fine, I promise." Oliver pulled out extra blankets from a chest and made himself a bedroll on the floor near the stove. It would actually be quite comfortable, with the heat from the stove keeping him warm through the night. He added more wood to the fire, making sure it would last until morning. Josephine retreated to the bed in the corner, pulling the quilts up around her. Oliver turned down the lamps, leaving just one burning low to provide a small amount of light. The cabin settled into quiet, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. "Oliver." Josephine's voice came softly from the darkness. "Yes, thank you again. For everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. Your kindness today, it changed everything for me. I could be dead right now, frozen on the prairie. Instead, I am warm and safe and fed. I will never forget what you did." Oliver felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the stove. "You are welcome, Josephine. Sleep well." "Good night, Oliver." Oliver lay in his bedroll, listening to the storm and thinking about the strange turn his day had taken. This morning, he had woken up alone in this cabin, as he did every morning, expecting nothing more eventful than a trip to town for supplies. Now, a beautiful, intelligent woman was sleeping in his bed, and his life felt somehow fuller than it had in years. He tried not to think about how right it felt to have Josephine here, how the cabin seemed less empty with her presence. She was a stranger, and she would leave as soon as the storm passed. There was no point in entertaining foolish thoughts about anything more. But as Oliver finally drifted off to sleep, he could not quite banish those thoughts completely. Morning came with strange quietness. The wind had died down during the night, and when Oliver woke and looked out the window, he saw that the snow had stopped falling. The world outside was buried under several feet of pristine white, sculpted into fantastic drifts by the wind. The sky was clear and painfully blue, and the sun glittered off the snow with blinding intensity. Oliver stoked the fire back to life and put on coffee. The smell must have woken Josephine because she stirred in the bed, then sat up, looking momentarily confused about where she was before memory returned. "Good morning," Oliver said. "Coffee is almost ready." "Good morning," Josephine replied, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "The storm stopped, it appears so, but there is a lot of snow out there, several feet at least. It is going to take time for the roads to become passable again." Josephine absorbed this information. "How long do you think?" "Hard to say. Could be a few days, could be a week or more depending on when we get a thaw. Certainly, you are not going anywhere today." "I should try to get word to my cousin," Josephine said. "She will be worried about me. When the drifts settle and I can move around better, I will ride over to her farm and let her know you are safe," Oliver promised. "But that will not be today. Maybe tomorrow if conditions improve." They shared breakfast, using some of the eggs Oliver had in the cabin and some bread he had purchased in town. The simple meal felt companionable, comfortable in a way that surprised Oliver given that they had known each other less than a day. After breakfast, Oliver needed to tend to the horses and his small herd of cattle. He bundled up in his heaviest coat and hat and ventured outside. The cold was intense, the kind that seized your lungs with every breath. The snow came up past his knees in most places, much deeper in the drifts. He fought his way to the barn and checked on Copper and Josephine's mare. Both horses were fine, having weathered the storm well in the shelter of the barn. Oliver gave them fresh hay and water, then set about the harder task of checking on his cattle. His herd had a sheltered area in a draw about a quarter-mile from the cabin where they typically gathered during storms. Oliver trudged through the deep snow, following the fence line to keep his bearings. The world was eerily beautiful and completely silent except for the crunch of snow under his boots and his own labored breathing. He found his cattle huddled in the draw as expected. They were hardy animals, bred for the harsh Nebraska climate, and most had weathered the storm without issue. But as he counted heads, Oliver realized he was missing about a dozen animals. They had probably drifted with the storm, getting separated from the main herd. He would need to search for them, but that would have to wait until the snow settled more. When Oliver returned to the cabin, stamping snow off his boots at the door, he found that Josephine had tidied up and was preparing lunch. She had changed back into her own clothes, which had finally dried overnight. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "I thought I could at least help with the cooking while I am here." "I do not mind at all," Oliver said, grateful for the help and the company. "How are you at cooking?" "Adequate," Josephine said with a smile. "I am no chef, but I can produce edible meals. I have had to take care of myself for the past 2 years, so I have learned by necessity." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. The weather remained cold and clear, but the snow was too deep for any serious travel. Oliver tended to the animals and did necessary chores outside, while Josephine handled cooking and keeping the cabin in order. They talked constantly, sharing stories and opinions, debating everything from politics to literature to the best way to make biscuits. Oliver found himself increasingly captivated by Josephine. She was unlike any woman he had known before. She had opinions on things most women were expected to remain silent about, and she was not afraid to express them. She was well-read and thoughtful, but also practical and down to earth. She could discuss philosophy one moment and the proper way to salt beef the next. For her part, Josephine seemed equally interested in Oliver. She asked him endless questions about ranching, about the land, about his life out here. She wanted to know everything, and she listened to his answers with genuine interest. On the 3rd day after the storm, the sun came out with enough warmth to start melting some of the snow. Oliver decided he could make it to the neighbor's ranch, which was on the way to where Josephine's cousin lived. From there, he could get word to Josephine's cousin that she was safe. "I should come with you," Josephine said when Oliver announced his plan. "The snow is still pretty deep in places," Oliver said doubtfully. "It will be hard going." "I can manage," Josephine insisted. "And I should be the one to speak to my cousin to explain what happened." Oliver could see she was determined, and he had learned over the past few days that when Josephine made up her mind about something, it was pointless to argue. "All right," he agreed, "but we need to dress you more appropriately for riding in this weather." Oliver found an old pair of his pants and a heavy coat that Josephine could wear over her dress. She looked somewhat ridiculous in the oversized clothing, but she would be much warmer than in her regular traveling clothes. They saddled up Copper and the mare and set out through the snow. The journey was slow and difficult, the horses struggling through drifts in places. But the animals were strong and sure-footed, and gradually they made progress. They reached the neighbor's ranch by mid-morning. Samuel Peterson was an older man who had been ranching in Nebraska for 20 years. He greeted them with surprise and invited them in for coffee. "Thought you might have had some trouble in that storm, Oliver," Samuel said. "Was about to ride over and check on you once the snow melted a bit more." "I made it back just in time," Oliver said, then introduced Josephine and explained the situation. Samuel nodded knowingly. "The Harper farm is about 5 miles west of here. I can send my son over with word that Miss Harper is safe." "No sense in you folks riding all that way just to turn around and come back." "That is very kind of you," Josephine said. "Not at all, miss. That is how we do things out here. We look after each other." Samuel's eyes twinkled as he looked between Oliver and Josephine. "Though I have to say, being stranded in a blizzard with Oliver Armstrong is not the worst fate that could befall a young lady. He is one of the good ones." Oliver felt his face heat with embarrassment, but Josephine smiled graciously. "I discovered that very quickly, Mr. Peterson. I owe him my life." They stayed long enough to have coffee and some of Mrs. Peterson's excellent pie, then headed back to Oliver's ranch. The return journey seemed shorter, perhaps because they were both more confident now that the worst of the snow had been navigated. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, a comfortable silence stretched between them. Oliver was acutely aware that their time together was coming to an end. The snow would continue to melt, roads would become passable, and Josephine would go to her cousin's farm to begin her new life as a schoolteacher. The thought filled him with a melancholy he had not expected. "What are you thinking about?" Josephine asked, watching him from across the cabin. Oliver considered deflecting the question, but something about the intimacy they had developed over the past few days made him want to be honest. "I was thinking that you will be leaving soon and that I will miss having you here." Josephine's expression softened. "I will miss being here too. These past few days have been strange, but also wonderful in a way. I have enjoyed our conversations, our time together." "So have I," Oliver admitted, "more than I can properly express." They looked at each other across the cabin, and Oliver felt something shift in the air between them. It was as if a door had opened, revealing possibilities that neither had dared to acknowledge before. "Oliver," Josephine said softly, "I need to tell you something. Since I arrived here, since you saved my life and brought me to your home, I have felt something I did not expect. At first I thought it was just gratitude, appreciation for what you had done. But it is more than that. I find myself drawn to you in ways that I have never experienced before." Oliver's heart began to pound. "Josephine, I feel the same way. From the moment I met you, even in the middle of that storm, there was something about you that reached me. These past few days, getting to know you, talking with you, sharing this space with you, it has awakened something in me that I thought I had given up on." "What had you given up on?" Josephine asked. "The possibility of sharing my life with someone," Oliver said honestly. "I have been alone out here for 3 years. I told myself I was content with that I did not need anyone else. But the truth is, I was just protecting myself from disappointment. It is easier to be alone than to risk wanting something you might not find." Josephine stood and crossed the cabin to where Oliver sat. She knelt beside his chair, taking his hand in hers. "What if you have found it?" she asked quietly. Oliver looked into her eyes, seeing the same vulnerability and hope he felt reflected there. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying that in the span of a few days, you have changed my whole world," Josephine said. "Your kindness changed everything for me, Oliver. Not just because you saved my life, but because you showed me what kind of man you are. You are good and decent and honorable. You are intelligent and thoughtful. You have built something meaningful here with your own hands, and I do not want to leave." "You do not have to leave," Oliver said, his voice rough with emotion. Stay here. Not just for a few more days, but permanently. Marry me, Josephine. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. Are you sure? You barely know me. I know enough, Oliver said firmly. I know you are brave and kind and smart. I know you make me laugh and make me think. I know that this cabin feels like a home when you are in it instead of just a place to sleep. I know that when I think about you leaving, it feels like something essential is being torn away. If that is not knowing enough, then I do not know what is. Yes, Josephine whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Oliver pulled her up from where she knelt and into his arms. They held each other tightly, and Oliver felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was what had been missing from his life. Not just a woman, but this woman, with her particular combination of strength and gentleness, intelligence and warmth. They pulled apart slightly, and Oliver cupped Josephine's face in his hands. I love you, he said. I know it seems impossible to love someone you have known less than a week, but I do. I love you, Josephine Harper. I love you too, Josephine said, tears streaming down her face now. I love you, Oliver Armstrong. They kissed then, a gentle meeting of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. It was a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities, of a future being built between them with every shared breath. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Oliver rested his forehead against Josephine's, holding her close. I suppose I should speak to your cousin, Oliver said. Ask for her blessing, do things properly. Josephine laughed. I think the propriety of our situation went out the window when I spent several nights alone with you in this cabin. But yes, we should speak to my cousin, and I need to send word about the teaching position. They will need to find someone else. Are you sure you want to give that up? Oliver asked. Teaching is important to you. It is, Josephine agreed, but I can still teach. There are children on the neighboring ranches who need education. I can hold classes here, start a small school. It might not be as formal as the town school, but it would serve a purpose. Oliver loved that she had already started planning their future together, finding ways to integrate her passions and skills into their life. That is a wonderful idea, he said. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future they would build together. Oliver would need to make improvements to the cabin, expand it to accommodate a growing family. They talked about children, about how many they wanted, about the life they would create on this land. The next morning, they rode together to Josephine's cousin's farm. Martha Harper Peterson, who turned out to be Samuel Peterson's daughter-in-law, was overjoyed to hear that Josephine was safe. She had been frantic with worry when Josephine failed to arrive and the storm hit. Martha was less thrilled when Josephine explained that she would not be taking the teaching position after all, but would instead be marrying Oliver. But her concerns melted away when she saw how Josephine and Oliver looked at each other, the obvious love and devotion between them. I suppose I cannot argue with true love, Martha said with a smile, and Oliver is a good man. You could do far worse, cousin. I know, Josephine said happily. I could not do better. They held the wedding 2 weeks later, as soon as the roads were clear enough for the circuit preacher to make his rounds. It was a simple ceremony held in the Petersons' farmhouse, with Samuel and Martha Peterson standing as witnesses. Josephine wore a simple dress she had brought with her from Ohio, and Oliver wore his best suit, the one he had worn when mustering out of the cavalry. The ceremony was brief, but the words carried weight. Oliver promised to love and cherish Josephine, to provide for her and protect her, to be her partner and companion for the rest of their days. Josephine made the same promises, her voice steady and sure as she pledged herself to Oliver. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Oliver kissed Josephine with all the love and hope he felt for their future. The small gathering applauded, and Mrs. Peterson wiped tears from her eyes. After the ceremony, there was a simple celebration with food and drink. The neighbors from surrounding ranches had come, curious to meet the woman who had captured Oliver Armstrong's heart so quickly and completely. They found Josephine charming and intelligent, and most agreed that Oliver had chosen well. As the sun set, Oliver and Josephine rode back to their cabin, now officially their home together. Oliver had spent the past 2 weeks making improvements. He had built a better bed frame and purchased a new mattress. He had added shelves and hooks for Josephine's belongings. He had even constructed a small writing desk where Josephine could prepare lessons for the children she planned to teach. That night, they consummated their marriage, coming together with tenderness and passion. Oliver was gentle with Josephine, aware that this was new territory for her. They took their time learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and joy. It was awkward in moments, as first times often are, but it was also beautiful and sacred, a physical expression of the love they had declared. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Josephine's head resting on Oliver's chest. He stroked her hair, marveling at how much his life had changed in such a short time. "Are you happy?" Oliver asked. "Incredibly happy," Josephine murmured. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Oliver admitted. "A month ago, I could not have imagined this. Now I cannot imagine my life any other way." "That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me," Josephine said. "If it had not stranded me, if you had not been there to help, I would have taken that teaching job and never known you existed." "I am grateful to that blizzard too," Oliver said, "though I would not care to repeat the experience of riding through it." Josephine laughed softly. "Agreed. Once was quite enough." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the stove keeping the cabin warm against the winter night outside. Life settled into a routine over the following months. Oliver worked his ranch, tending his cattle and managing the land. The missing cattle from the storm turned up in the spring, most of them surviving the experience. Josephine started her school, teaching children from 3 neighboring ranches. She held classes 3 days a week in the cabin, which Oliver had expanded slightly to accommodate the students. Word of Josephine's school spread, and soon she had more students than she could handle in the small space. Oliver and some of the neighboring ranchers got together and built a proper one-room schoolhouse halfway between the various ranches. It was a community effort that brought everyone together and gave the children a better place to learn. Josephine proved to be an excellent teacher. She was patient but firm, creative in her methods, and genuinely invested in her students' success. The children adored her, and their parents appreciated the education their children were receiving. By summer, Josephine was pregnant with their first child. Oliver was overjoyed at the news, immediately becoming even more protective and attentive than usual. Josephine tolerated his hovering with good humor, gently reminding him that pregnancy was a natural condition, not an illness. Their son was born the following February during another Nebraska snowstorm, though this one was not nearly as severe as the blizzard that had brought them together. Oliver paced anxiously while Martha Peterson and another neighbor woman attended to Josephine. When he finally heard the baby's cry and was allowed into the room, he found Josephine exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," Josephine said softly. Oliver looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets and felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "He is perfect," Oliver whispered. They named him Thomas, after Oliver's father, and he grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Margaret, who had her father's coloring and her mother's quick intelligence. 3 years after that, another son arrived, Samuel, named after their neighbor who had helped them so much in those early days. The ranch prospered over the years. Oliver proved to be a skilled rancher, and with Josephine's partnership and support, he expanded the operation steadily. They bought adjacent land when it became available, growing their holdings. They hired hands to help during busy seasons, and eventually built a bunkhouse to accommodate workers year-round. Josephine continued teaching until Margaret was born, then took a few years away from the schoolhouse to focus on their young children. But she always found ways to educate and nurture learning, both in her own children and in the community. She organized a lending library, hosting it in their now significantly expanded home. She held reading circles for women in the area, discussing books and ideas. As their children grew, they became involved in the community in various ways. Thomas showed an aptitude for ranching and worked alongside his father from a young age. Margaret inherited her mother's love of learning and became a voracious reader. Samuel was the adventurous one, always exploring and getting into mischief. Oliver and Josephine's home became a gathering place for the community. They hosted barn dances and holiday celebrations. Their table always had room for one more person, and they were known for their hospitality and generosity. The years passed in the way years do, marked by seasons and cycles, by births and deaths, by droughts and abundant harvests, by struggles overcome and triumphs celebrated. Through it all, Oliver and Josephine remained deeply in love, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Oliver took Josephine back to the cabin where they had first stayed during the blizzard. They had moved into a much larger house years ago as their family grew, but they had kept the original cabin, using it for storage and as a place for hired hands to stay sometimes. Oliver had spent the previous week cleaning it out and making it comfortable again. He had moved the original bed back in, along with the table and chairs where they had shared so many meals during that fateful week. He had even repaired the old stove and got it working again. Josephine gasped when she walked in and saw what he had done. "Oliver, it looks just like it did." "As close as I could manage," Oliver said. "I wanted us to remember where it all started." They spent the night in the cabin, just the two of them, something that was rare with 3 children and a busy ranch. They talked late into the night, reminiscing about that week 20 years ago when a blizzard had brought them together. "You remember what you said to me that night?" Josephine asked. "After I agreed to marry you, I said I loved you," Oliver replied. "You did. And I told you that your kindness had changed everything for me. Do you know that is still true? Every single day, your kindness continues to change everything. The way you love me, the way you are with our children, the way you treat everyone you meet. You are the best man I have ever known, Oliver Armstrong." Oliver felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine. That blizzard brought me more than just a wife. It brought me a partner, a best friend, a love deeper than I knew was possible. You have made my life richer and fuller than I ever imagined it could be." They made love that night in the small cabin, their bodies older now, but their passion undiminished. 20 years of marriage had taught them exactly how to please each other, and they moved together with practiced ease and deep intimacy. The next morning, they walked hand in hand back to the main house where their children were waiting, no doubt having gotten into some kind of mischief in their absence. But neither Oliver nor Josephine minded. This was the life they had built together, loud and chaotic and full of love. The years continued to pass. Thomas married a neighboring rancher's daughter and took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, though Oliver stayed involved well into his 60s. Margaret became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over the community school. Samuel had his father's restless spirit and went east to study agriculture at college, returning with new ideas about cattle breeding and land management that helped the ranch prosper even more. Oliver and Josephine became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They watched their family grow and spread, branches extending from the root they had planted on that snowy February night in 1885. On cold winter days, when the wind howled across the prairie and snow fell from heavy gray skies, Oliver and Josephine would sit together by the fire, holding hands and remembering. They would talk about that first blizzard, about how scared they had been, about how neither of them could have known that the worst storm either had ever experienced would lead to the greatest blessing of their lives. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped to help me that day?" Josephine asked one evening when they were in their 70s, still living in the home they had built together, surrounded by family. "Never," Oliver said firmly. "Because I cannot imagine any version of my life that does not include you. From the moment I saw you struggling with that horse and that broken wagon, my fate was sealed. I was always going to stop. I was always going to help you, and we were always going to fall in love." "You sound very certain of that," Josephine said with a smile. "I am certain. Some things are just meant to be. We were meant to be." Josephine leaned her head on Oliver's shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall outside their window. It was a gentle snow this time, nothing like the blizzard that had brought them together, but it still reminded them of where their story began. As twilight deepened into night, their family gathered around them. Thomas and his wife, Margaret and her husband, Samuel and his family, grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house with noise and laughter and life. This was their legacy, Oliver thought. Not just the ranch or the land, but this family, this love that had grown from a single act of kindness during a storm. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Oliver and Josephine climbed the stairs to their bedroom. They moved slower now, their bodies bearing the marks of 7 decades of living, but they still held hands as they walked. They lay in bed together, Josephine curled into Oliver's side as she had done for nearly 50 years. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in white. "I love you," Oliver whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Josephine whispered back. "Thank you for saving me that day." "You saved me too," Oliver said, "in every way that matters." They fell asleep together, two lives so thoroughly intertwined that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. Oliver passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Josephine beside him and his family nearby. Josephine followed him less than a year later, unwilling to spend more time apart from her beloved husband than necessary. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the endless Nebraska sky. Their gravestone bore a simple inscription: Oliver and Josephine Armstrong, together always. Their family continued to thrive, generation after generation, all of them knowing the story of how their family began. They told it to their children and their children's children, the tale of a blizzard and a broken wagon, of a cowboy who stopped to help a stranger, and of a love that grew from that single act of kindness. The original cabin still stood, preserved by the family as a memorial to where it all began. On anniversaries and special occasions, family members would visit it, sitting inside and imagining that fateful week when Oliver and Josephine had sheltered there together, falling in love while a blizzard raged outside. And sometimes, On cold winter nights when snow fell heavy across the prairie, those who visited the cabin swore they could feel a warmth there that had nothing to do with any stove, a warmth that came from the love that had been born within those walls so many years ago. The land itself seemed to remember. The cattle that grazed the hills, the grass that waved in the wind, the very earth that had witnessed their story, all of it held the memory of Oliver and Josephine. Their love had seeped into the soil, becoming part of the fabric of the place. In the town of Lincoln, Nebraska, now much larger than it had been in 1885, there was a plaque in the Historical Society Museum. It commemorated the winter of 1885, the year of the terrible blizzards that had claimed so many lives across the prairie. But it also mentioned Oliver Armstrong and Josephine Harper, as an example of how even in the darkest times, human kindness and love could prevail. The schoolhouse that Josephine had helped establish continued to operate for decades, educating generations of children. When it finally closed as the area became less populated and children were bused to larger towns for school, the building was preserved as a historical landmark. Inside, there was a room dedicated to Josephine Armstrong, the teacher who had never given up on the importance of education, even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Nebraska prairie. The ranch itself stayed in the family for over 100 years, passed down through Thomas's line, then to his children and grandchildren. They modernized and adapted over the years, but they always maintained the original cabin and the main house that Oliver and Josephine had built. These structures stood as testaments to what two people could create when they committed themselves to each other, and to a shared vision of the future. Every year on the anniversary of that first blizzard, the family would gather for a reunion. They would share the story again, making sure the youngest members of the family knew where they came from, knew the importance of kindness and courage and love. They would talk about how Oliver had risked his own life to save a stranger, how Josephine had trusted him enough to ride into the unknown, how that trust had been rewarded 1,000 times over. The love story of Oliver and Josephine Armstrong became legendary in that part of Nebraska. It was the kind of story people told when they wanted to believe in true love and fate, in the idea that something beautiful could come from something terrifying. It was a reminder that in the harshest conditions, the human heart could still find warmth and connection. Their descendants carried their legacy forward not just in name but in character. They inherited Oliver's integrity and work ethic, his dedication to building something lasting and good. They inherited Josephine's intelligence and compassion, her belief in the power of education and the importance of community. These traits were woven into the family's DNA, passed down through blood and through story, and always, there was love. The descendants of Oliver and Josephine understood that love was not just a feeling but a choice, an action, a commitment renewed every single day. They had learned this from the story of their ancestors, from the example of two people who had chosen each other in the midst of a blizzard and had kept choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. The prairie wind still blew across the land, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. Snow still fell in winter, sometimes light dustings, sometimes storms that buried the world in white. But the family that had grown from that first meeting between Oliver and Josephine stood firm against whatever challenges came, rooted deep in the land and in the love that had started it all. In the end, that was Oliver and Josephine's true legacy. Not the land or the ranch or even the immediate family they had created, but the understanding that love and kindness could change everything. That a single choice to help a stranger could ripple outward through generations, creating waves of goodness and grace that touched hundreds of lives. Josephine had been right all those years ago when she told Oliver that his kindness had changed everything for her. What she could not have known then, what neither of them could have imagined, was just how far those changes would reach, how many lives would be touched by the love that began in a small cabin during a blizzard in 1885. Their story became the foundation on which an entire family was built. And that family, in turn, became a force for good in their community and beyond. They were ranchers and teachers, doctors and lawyers, artists and engineers. They spread across the country and even around the world. But they all carried with them the story of Oliver and Josephine, the cowboy and the schoolteacher who found each other in a storm. And every one of them knew, deep in their hearts, that they existed because one man had chosen kindness over self-preservation, because one woman had chosen trust over fear, because two people had chosen love over loneliness. That knowledge shaped who they were and how they moved through the world. As the decades turned into a new century, and that century gave way to another, the Armstrong family continued to grow and thrive. They adapted to changing times while holding fast to the values that Oliver and Josephine had established. They remained committed to their community, to education, to hard work, to treating others with respect and kindness. The cabin on the prairie stood as a monument to where it all began. Carefully maintained by each generation, it remained much as it had been on that night when Oliver first brought Josephine there to shelter from the storm. Visitors could still see the stove where Oliver had cooked their first meal together, the table where they had shared so many conversations, the space where they had fallen in love. And perhaps, if you visited on a cold winter night when snow fell softly outside and the wind whispered across the prairie, you could still feel something of what Oliver and Josephine had felt in that place. You could feel the warmth of new love, the comfort of finding your person, the hope of building a future together. Their story was complete now, lived fully from beginning to end. It had started with a blizzard and a broken wagon, with a cowboy who stopped to help and a schoolteacher who trusted a stranger. It had grown into a marriage that lasted nearly 50 years, into a family that spanned generations, into a love that became legendary. Oliver and Josephine Armstrong had lived the kind of love story that most people only dream about. They had found each other against all odds, in the worst possible circumstances, and they had built something beautiful and lasting. Their kindness toward each other and toward everyone they met had indeed changed everything, creating ripples that continued long after they were gone. And so their story ended not with sadness but with celebration. Celebration of a life well lived, of a love well loved, of a legacy well earned. They had taken the gift of that blizzard, the chance meeting that could have ended in tragedy, and they had transformed it into something magnificent. They had proven that love could bloom even in the harshest conditions, that commitment and kindness could overcome any obstacle, that two people who chose each other could build something that would outlast them both. The prairie remembered them. The land held their story. And their family carried their love forward into the future, a living testament to what Oliver and Josephine had created together. They had started with nothing but each other and a small cabin in a storm, and they had built an empire of love that would never fade. That was the ending of their story, and it was a good one, complete and whole and satisfying, with every thread tied off, every question answered, every promise fulfilled. Oliver and Josephine Armstrong had lived and loved and left behind something precious. Their kindness had indeed changed everything, not just for each other but for everyone their lives had touched. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for. To love and be loved, to build something meaningful, to leave the world a little better than they found it. Oliver and Josephine had done all of that and more. Their story was finished now, but the love they had created lived on, eternal and unbreakable, a beacon of hope and possibility for all who heard their tale.